find that people still sort of respond bizarrely to my sexuality, you know? Like, one of my favorite things that I get is, oh wait, are you like a complete lesbian? Like, you don't like guys at all? I get it. This screams, stick a dick in my face. I get it. I know. Whatever. Or when I say that I think a guy is really attractive, people look at me and they're like, whoa, that's weird. I thought you were a lesbian. I'm like, I am a lesbian. I don't have holograms over my eyes that make men look all distorted. You know what I mean?
Hello, everybody. I love it when I get to roll out the red carpet for the show Notes from Hollywood to feature another exciting guest. And I'm very excited about my guest today, Renee Santos. You know, Renee and I met each other when we both worked on a short film. And I want to say that that was about 20 years ago. And I'll let her correct me or confirm that when we actually are speaking. So that was a long time ago, and she had certainly paid her dues. She has quite an education in theater and performing and in so many other things, but she really burst onto the stand-up comedy scene 6 years ago in her first national television debut on Showtime Network's Pride Comedy Jam. And at the time, the network was describing Santos and that show as a hip and hilarious show with a great ensemble of up-and-coming diverse comics, including the witty anecdotes of Latina Lesbian comic Renee Santos. She has been a regular on the Los Angeles comedy scene, performing consistently at local clubs, including the Comedy Store, the Laugh Factory, and the Hollywood Improv. And in April of 2015, she became a bi-coastal comic. I used some of her timing, earning a residency at New York City's New York Comedy Club. There's a lot that I can tell you about Renee, but we'll dive into that deep, dark details. There's nothing dark about. Well, comedy always does really have a kind of a dark side to it. It really needs to, frankly. So we're going to be having a wonderful conversation with Renee and some really great comedy clips. Also, a fellow comic, Paul Jasek, says hello and that he's so glad he's here and he loves Renee, which is a great way for me to tell you all at home that you can comment when you're watching live and I can put your comments on the screen or not. You know, I get to make that decision, but you can try with questions or comments. So for their support of my show, I want to thank DAP Health. They serve all of Riverside County. They're located in Palm Springs, California. Actually, I am in the affordable housing complex associated with DAP Health. And I couldn't do this and live as healthy and powerfully as I do without them. If you ever come to Palm Springs, my audience is worldwide. Check out 849 Restaurant and Lounge. It is just a fantastic place, and because of we just hit the orange tier, I know they're happy because now they can increase their capacity, but they're just brilliant. And around the world, you all should save the date. As the official broadcaster of Palm Springs Pride, I've been given the permission to tell you to save the date, and the main events usually happen at the end of Pride Week, and in this case, that's November 5th through 7th. Also, for my local audience, if you're feeling isolated, lonely, disconnected, and you want or need more humanity in your life, check out the centercv.org. They're building vibrant community. And merch. Promo Homo TV merch is now on Amazon. It's also linked from promohomo.tv. I encourage you to get the merch, and if you send a selfie, including the merch, with your permission, I will feature you in the show. Now, beginning June, I have a limited episodic series that will go into World AIDS Day, December 1st, focusing on my living powerfully with HIV memoir, Life Positive. Get it at Life Positive Book if you want to participate in that special episodic series. In the book, I write about the creation of a worldwide music video campaign to promote HIV testing and safer sex. It's on YouTube in 21 languages, subtitled in 21 languages. The song is in English, and you can ask your smart speaker to play it. And I'm going to prove right now, if I haven't done so already, I am a promo homo because I'm an actor. If you are auditioning anybody for anything and I might be right for it, check out my clips at that link, promohomo.tv/actor. You cannot miss that. So I want to really thank the Promo Homo TV superstars. I'm talking about you, would you like to have your name and a link to the website or social media profile of your choice listed at promohomo.tv? Here's how. So I know that my guest today is used to paparazzi, and if she isn't, she will be. She's amazingly talented. She's backstage. I've decided to air another one of her comedy clips now. I told her I was going to do it later, but I have more for later. So here's another clip from Renee, and then I'll be back with Renee live in studio after another exciting little opening that promotes more about Promo Homo TV, because I am a promo homo. Okay, now play. Oh.
So you know what's really interesting about having lived in both New York and LA is I find that people from the opposite city have a lot to say about the other city. Have you guys ever noticed that? Like, people from LA hate New Yorkers. I got all kind of opinions. And people from New York City hate people from LA. And I love to ask, have you ever lived in the other city? People are like, no. I'm like, wow, you have a really strong position on a place you've never lived. That's really funny. But I am now officially bi-coastal. That's about as bi as this Lesbo show is gonna get, you guys. That's it. That's it.
So more lesbians and homosexuals coming up after this.
And I just can't get enough of your energy. I just can't get enough. You're the light in the middle of the night, and I just can't get enough. Oh, 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 oh,
And without further delay, Renee Santos, how are you?
I'm doing quite well. I love that song. I can't get enough of your love, Nicholas Snow. How are you?
Thank you. I'm so great. You know, I don't really think we've seen each other since we met. If we have,
20 years ago.
well, it was with a Power Up short film, right? Didn't we meet on the set of a Power Up short film?
I'm pretty sure 5 years ago when I was 20.
Yes, it was a long time ago, and we met, and I was in it. I don't remember if you were in it or not. I know that what I did was I was an extra, and I sat at a dinner table outdoors at night.
Yeah, I was an extra too. Yeah.
Then we must have. I think we were at the same dinner table.
Was that a Jamie Babbitt film? I feel like it was a Jamie Babbitt film.
I'm not sure. For any of you that want to know what we're talking about, just Google Power Up, the professional organization of women and entertainment reaching up. So that's what, and you'll find out more. So Renee, wow, so much has happened for you, especially in the last, 6-7 years. But you've been at this for a long time. To what do you owe your dedication and perseverance?
I'd have to say, one of the most valuable things I've learned in pursuing this industry is that you need to be persistently patient. And there's this fine balance between proactively staying in connection with people, but also knowing when you're supposed to wait and be a sponge and learn. And, one of the things I really love that my first acting teacher taught me is that when you meet people in the industry, you have to learn how to utilize them, not use them. And I've taken that to heart. Like when I meet somebody, I always think, what can I build as opposed to what can I do? What can they do for me right now? And it creates organic and authentic relationships. And I've noticed that as long as I can consistently stay on their radar by authentically caring about their lives or their work, I've worked with a lot of the same people. Like basically the people who have cast me over the last 20 years of my career are like the same 6 people. And it's because I've cultivated those relationships, So I think that's really important, to stay focused on cultivating relationships and having fun, but also honoring who you are. I think you can lovingly set boundaries, and it's best to do it before anybody knows you instead of, having somebody else decide who you are for you, because then it's hard to undo that,
80% of what you've just talked about are things that I live and breathe. And you have used one of my favorite words over and over again, which is authentic.
Yeah.
And you made a decision to be out very early in your career. Yeah. And I didn't remember to what extent you were out and and whether or not you led with that. Until, of course, I was doing the research for our show today, and then I see, oh, you're very out, and you lead with it all the time. And
my name is Renee. It rhymes with my sexuality, so I'm like Gay Renee. My sisters used to call me Gay Renee. So I feel like I accidentally lead with it because somebody else decided.
That's really funny. Before we dive more into the interview, I would love to play, let me see. I have 2 more clips of your comedy that I want to show the audience, and then we'll spend the rest of the show dishing after this.
You got it.
The ice cream truck that would go down the street, right, and the bell would go off? My mother told me that bell meant that the truck was empty. I was like, every time they gotta restock. What is going on? So not fair. It wasn't until I was a nanny 15 years later, actually for this nugget right here, Samantha Resnick. Let's give it up for Samantha Resnick, everybody. Yeah, the ice cream truck goes down her street and she goes running outside. I'm like, Sammy, what are you doing? That means it's empty. She's like, that, Renee, it doesn't mean that it's empty. I'm like, God damn it! Son of a bitch. I always suspected that I was Latina, though, because I am one of 6 siblings and none of us know our dad. Doesn't sound European to me, Mom. Doesn't sound European to me. Let's be honest. Right? Until we started applying to colleges, right? And then all of a sudden I was really Hispanic. And my mom's like, oh my... How much does it cost to go to that school? You know what, Renee? Check the Hispanic box, Renee. Check the Hispanic box. Matter of fact, check the lesbian box, Renee. Can you find the lesbian box? I was like, don't worry, Mom. I can find the lesbian box. Got it. Not a problem.
Yes, so you've checked the lesbian box time and time again.
The lesbian box for sure.
Yes. Well, let me see. 20 years ago, was Ellen out?
I think
You know,
so.
she must have been. Yes, because her talk show has been on for 20 years. So
Yeah.
yes, she was out. Ellen was out. I remember. So Ellen was not out, and Rosie was not out, and
they
and
kind
Ellen
of came out when I want to say I was like a teenager, maybe like my early 20s when they came out, and they felt like trailblazers to me, but it also broke my heart in a weird way too, because it was like, everybody knows. Why did it take you so long? Do you know what I mean? It was that sort of thing. But
just to your point, one of the stories I was about to reference is that when Ellen was on Rosie's show, they both joked with each other about the rumors they might be Lebanese.
That's funny. I came up to my mom and told her I was a homoxual. I was so nervous that I just butchered the pronunciation of the word in the hopes that I would confuse her.
Okay, so I happened to watch the GLAAD Media Awards last night on Hulu. So I don't know how long the show, the GLAAD Media Awards will be on Hulu. And kudos to executive producer Sarah Kate Ellis, who's also the head of GLAAD, the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, although I think maybe they describe it differently, but it's called GLAAD. I felt really old in some ways because so many of the award winners are much younger and doing work that I hadn't seen, and a lot I didn't even know about. And it just it made me feel old, but it also made me feel grateful, because 2 decades ago, those of us who were out creating work, there wasn't relatively speaking that many of us, but you and I were there.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Aging in general is very interesting, but yeah, to see this like next year, because I'm at the place in my life where for the first time, the generation below me are also adults. Like even 10 years ago when I was in my 30s, like the generation below me, they were children. So I wasn't really having these dialogues, you know? And so now that I'm in my 40s, it's fine. You know, it's interesting to see these young artists like coming up, and I love the freedom that they have, but also I think sometimes there's that lack of appreciation for what our predecessors had to go through in order for them to have that freedom, you know? And I think there's a fine balance between knowing what it was like to have it be a little bit more difficult. And even for me, you know, I was able to come flying out of the closet. I have my brother-in-law's parents were lesbian. So when I was a kid, I actually had lesbian role models. And so it was sort of, it was like indoctrinated in me to respect the older community. So I sort of, I felt like I couldn't be in the closet almost as a way of being of service to my community. Like whether or not it was uncomfortable for me or not, one of the problems I thought was that lack of transparency. If I'm not willing to say who I am, then I'm attaching shame to my sexuality. And it's really important that whether or not you know, yes, I had fear. I had fear of how that would sort of navigate my career. But then I have a vigilant spiritual practice, and I firmly believe that no door is going to be open that my faith won't fit through, you know? And I had to know, like, if I'm just, you gotta be honest, you know? But I think these young artists, they really are like creating a lot of content that we haven't even talked about. I think that we're elevating the trans community, which wasn't a dialogue that was coming, that was, even though, trans people and gay people, we've been around forever. It's just when we finally start to have a platform where we have a voice, there's some of the conservative population will be like, they came out of nowhere and now it's a phase. And I'm like, it's not a phase. We just finally feel like we have the right to have some visibility, you know what I mean? And so I think the work that they're doing is important. It's really, really important.
Oh, definitely. Now, one of the things you said is that we are elevating the trans community. Well, as allies, we are. But and I know you agree with this, but for anyone that might interpret this a different way, the trans community has been elevating themselves and all of us for decades. I mean, the LGBTQ civil rights movement and the equality we have today just would not exist without the trans community. So I know that you agree with that as well. Regarding role models, so Paul says he's been doing gay comedy since '89, and that he only had Paul Lynde as a role model. Well, Paul Lynde was a spectacular role model in that time and quite hysterical. I performed at the gay comedy night at the Comedy Store for about a year in the early '90s in the Belly Room. I never intended to become a stand-up comic, but I wanted to be a more well-rounded performer. Talk to me about about how you actually have made your way into film and television, and as part of that, tell me about what you envision as your first big break as an actor versus stand-up comedy.
Thank you for asking that. I was having a conversation just the other day that sometimes I think when you're in the professional pursuit of the career and an artistic career and you're not a celebrity yet, that people don't envision us as like multi-hyphenate. So as much as I love being a stand-up, I'm very much an actor. And so, I appreciate you asking. I think for me, as far as, there's some things like what is the big role that leveraged my career as opposed to as an actor, what was the role that made me feel whole as an artist? I feel like those are two different answers.
Oh, totally.
I did a film recently, a couple of years ago, directed and written by Andrea Meyerson, called One Way Street. It's won in many festivals, short film, but it was my first real meaty lead role. I actually play straight in it, which was a stretch for me, but it felt very transformative. And so as far as a challenge as an artist, I enjoyed playing straight because I'm thinking how many straight actors have to play gay, and just I wanted to see are you really an actor? Because if you're really an actor, you can embrace a role. And so I really stepped out of my comfort zone, and I realized that allowing other people's stories to come to life was just as important to me as me sharing my own experience, so that as far as an artist, that would be the role for me that made me really feel sort of complete. But I think as far as leveraging my career, I got my very first co-star role on the show 11th Hour, where I played a checkout girl, and it was what got me into the Screen Actors Guild. And so, I remember getting my SAG card and that being that moment where I'm oh my God, I'm a professional actor, So I remember that being sort of a magical moment for me. And funny enough, my ex-girlfriend at the time, who was super sweet, my line on the show was, "Bob, can I get a price check over there?" Literally, that's all I said. "Bob, can I get a price check over there?" And so she threw me, Nick, it was the most magical but hilarious moment. She threw me a viewing party with a full-out printed banner from Kinko's, and on the banner it said, "Come see Renee say, Bob, can I get a price check over there?" It was hilarious. And we had all these people there, and popcorn and hummus and chips, and this one girl got up to pee, and she's like, "Oh my God, where are you?" And I'm like, "You can't get up to pee. I only say one line." She missed me on the show. But it was that moment where I felt whoa, I'm in it, I'm in it now. And that was a really cool feeling.
Fulfillment and multi-hyphenate. That's what I was thinking about actually you before the broadcast, knowing that I wanted to talk to you. And that's why I didn't, the headline I chose in the promoting the show wasn't about you being a stand-up comedy person. I described you as an out lesbian entertainer extraordinaire. That was my...
I love that. I mean, the Extraordinaire, that was amazing. I don't think anybody's let in with Extraordinaire. I appreciated that. That was really cool.
So Rick wants to know, what was the price when you got the price check?
Oh my God, that's really hilarious. I think it was like $11 or something.
What was the item?
Well, the reason why the scene got so messy is it took me too long to find out what the price was, and that's what like elevates the whole scene and sort of launches the episode. Oh,
that's very funny. So
I was the inciting incident of the episode, if you will.
Mm-hmm. I frankly think one of my most untapped talents is my acting. I'm going to throw that up while I promote myself. And I'm getting all new headshots done in late April. I've lost 60 pounds in 2 years, 40 in the last year, all healthy, working with a nutritionist. And I'm going to be really totally going for it. And of course, I also think that my singing has been on the back burner, which is how come I'm letting people know that they can ask their smart speaker to play my song. And when I was coming out, I didn't think I could be out and have the career that I wanted, which is how come I became the producer of independent independent content. You have also created some significant original content, and you have a special that's on Amazon Prime, Outside the Box, that people can watch right now, and you have a comedy album that's now on iTunes, if I'm correct. Talk about your role.
Anywhere you can get music. Oh, go ahead.
Anywhere. Oh, so that means it would be on Amazon too.
Yeah, it's on Spotify, it's on Google Play, XM Radio. So the same album, but on all of those musical platforms. And it's the same thing as my special. It's just the audio content versus the visual content. So if you're running on a treadmill, download the album. If you're sitting in front of the TV, watch it on Amazon.
So talk about your journey, not only creating your content, but producing it into a consumable form. Tell me one of the stories of something you've created tied to that question.
Sure. There's not really a formula on how I create. One of the things I'm not to promote Apple here, but the voice memos feature on the iPhone has saved my creativity, because there are many times, I've had survival jobs as a nanny or at Starbucks, and an idea will come to me, and I'll literally just like sneak off the floor and I'll say into my voice memos, okay, this is a really good idea. And it's not the joke yet. It's just so I don't lose the idea, and then and sometimes I revisit it and I'm like, this is awful. And other times I'm like, this is brilliant, and then I'll take time in the studio. I have this principle that you cannot get fired from a job you don't have. So when you're pursuing comedy or acting and you're not hired yet, the work is really in the pursuit of the work. So I would reserve studio space 2 days a week for 2-hour slots and just sometimes pace in a room, and it was almost like free form, where I'm like, I have nothing to say. I'm not funny. I'd get rid of my internal critic, like give her a voice and be like, that whole, like, you're ugly, you're stupid, why are you doing this? And then I'd be like, okay, thank you for sharing. Stop talking. And then I would be able to like sort of launch into an idea would come to me, and then I would, think about sort of my mom content. My mother is very homophobic, and speaking of artists being scary and damaged, it is true. Comics have some dark history, and so, some of my deepest wounds come from my relationship with my mother, and some of my most amazing comedy comes from my relationship with my mother. So she is both my muse and my antichrist, if you will. But so that's happened. I've had dialogues with my mom where, I'll go into the studio and I'm sort of just reiterating what she said, and I have one of my jokes that I'm most notable for. I have this like handicap joke, which is not at all making fun of handicapped people. It's just I heard a political debate that my mother had shared with me that she said I wasn't open-minded unless I also listened to the conservative side. So I launch into this like conservative debate between like Ted Cruz and Mitt Romney years ago, and they had said something really, really ignorant about. They didn't think gay people didn't want to discriminate against gay people, but thought gay people had a handicap. And so it made me so angry. And this is right after Proposition 8. And so all of a sudden, like I was in the studio and I was writing and I'm like, handicap, like that shit I'll take. And I want my blue little placard with 2 women screwing on it so I can park up front or center at the grocery store. And so I created this like absurdity comedy that came speaking to the fact that that is ridiculous to call queer people handicap. And so I wanted, that sort of came out of me out of pain. I watched this, I had seen this conversation, and it like, I wrote that set in 20 minutes. And then there are other times where I'll book a college gig and they're like, okay, we'd love to hear stuff about why you're Latina and why you're lesbian, and if you can do an impression or whatever. And then that's a little more calculated and structured. And so when I put pen to paper, I'm like, okay, they need this, they need that. I do impressions, I do parodies. So then I'll have to sit down and be like, grab your guitar. I do a Cartman impression. I do all this stuff. So, but I find my joy when it's not as calculated. I feel like when it's more organic, like that's how I started writing parodies. I didn't even know that I was a musician. I literally didn't know I was a musician. A plumber told me to be a musician because I had a guitar that was a present hanging on my wall that I was too scared to play. And he was like, girl, you cannot leave that hanging on your wall. That's a disgrace. And I'm like, what do you mean? So I just started taking guitar lessons and one day added that to my comedy. It's been a very interesting journey.
Well, referencing the bit that you shared about gay people with handicaps, I do know a lot of lesbians with golf handicaps.
Yes.
I do know lesbians with golf handicaps.
That can't play golf.
No, handicap is something. A handicap is a frame that a term you use in golf to determine how competitive you are.
Oh, see, I didn't even know this. I just transitioned from mini golf I played my first 9-hole course last year. I feel like I've officially earned my lesbian card.
For people,
I do enjoy golf, but I'm still learning.
For people who missed the top of the show, you talk about whether or not you're into guys. Are you a real lesbian? And you have this reference where you say, yeah, I realize this screams stick a dick in my face. And I really wish that I had something that screamed stick a dick in my face. I mean, I want that to happen with permission. I don't want to be assaulted, but I kind of am jealous of you if people think that you want a dick in your face.
That's another joke that sort of came organically. It's a weird thing, and I can only share my experience.
The joke about a dick in your face came organically?
Well, yeah, because people,
You're missing the pun. You're missing the pun.
Oh, that is funny. Oh my God. I'm not the only comedian here.
Oh, no, you're not. But anyway, continue. It came organically. I want to know how.
It came organically. No pun intended, really. That's why I missed it.
No, I understand. But I did not miss that. I don't miss sexual innuendo. I just don't.
I think for me, it's just been weird being a feminine lesbian because I think that's the only reason.
AKA lipstick lesbian.
Lipstick. I like to call myself a chapstick lesbian because I'll never wear a dress, but I flat iron my hair and I wear I like to be pretty, but I feel weird in a dress. So I call myself a chapstick lesbian. I'm like Sporty Spice. But, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. You go ahead.
I was just saying that it's been a weird thing to navigate being sort of femme, but because I feel like I don't always think ignorance is malice. you know? And so I've had a lot of experience where I don't think people are necessarily homophobic, but this weird interrogation of whether or not I'm fully a lesbian sort of comes from that space. And I think it's because I look feminine that like somehow maybe I'm still deciding, and I'm like, I'm in my 40s, like I got this. You know, like I'm pretty clear. But yeah, it's just like an interesting thing, because I feel like if I were more butch, I wouldn't be getting that conversation. But it was also part of my own personal existential crisis when I was 16, because I wanted to be pretty and I wanted to wear dresses, but I was in love with all my friends. And like that was very confusing, because in my limited experience, I thought, well, now I need to start transitioning to being more butch. Like I thought that was the next step, you know? So when I didn't desire to get more butch, I was confused, like, oh, well, maybe then I'm not completely gay. Even though I was never attracted to men, I just thought, well, like, why do I still want to be pretty and put makeup on? I don't know.
Well, what's so thrilling about the world today, and one of the takeaways from watching the GLAAD Media Awards, is that the young generation is really getting it. They're reinventing the world. We're no longer going to be bound by labels. I think labels are really important in the way that they have helped us identify ourselves so people would know us, understand us, and fight for our rights. But I think the best vision and version of the world is where labels aren't needed and we're just human beings.
Yeah, I agree with that. Although, you know, not to sound controversial, I think sometimes I have a challenge with, because we want to stay unlabeled, that it's sometimes hard to have a dialogue. And I feel like language in general is an agreement, right? We agree that a tree is a tree, or we agree, and they're just, it just allows us to communicate when we have agreements on certain things. And so sometimes I do find myself challenged as a queer person who loves everybody to like add a lot more pronouns and adjectives and LGBTQIA, LMNOP, QRS, TUV. It's like sometimes I'm like, oh my God, am I keeping up with all of it? As much as I want to, and I think it's important. There are times where I feel like that old school comes back in me, where I'm like, I just feel like queer is so inclusive and it's one word. You know, and I'm like, I don't understand why we're not using queer as much, because to me that removes the label. It's just all inclusive of, we don't fit in this binary thing. But I think that's a dialogue that's tough for people to have sometimes, you know.
Well, the answer to your question is sort of in the statement that you were making, and it's like the reason that the word queer is not all inclusive is specifically because the words and the labels help us reach agreement on something. And so there are all of these people, the word queer doesn't describe them. It's not who they are. And other people embrace it. You know, there's one person that's non-binary and another person might be gender fluid, and there might be someone that thinks those are the same things, and some people that might think they're opposite things. There's so many new things that we're all learning because individuals are fiercely expressing their truth.
I love that. And I think that activates the tough conversations, because there's also that part of me that's like, maybe because I'm a little bit older, there's a level of ignorance that I have too, that I'm not always, and I think young people today they're powerfully having these conversations. They have a boldness that I think my generation doesn't always have. Like I love that Generation Z, like they won't, if you mess up their latte at Starbucks, they won't say anything, but they'll jump a cop. You know what I mean? And you're like, yeah, I love it. Like they're not scared to speak their truth. And I think that's so important for us to hear too, like to have that courage to be like, let's remove these labels. And so I'm so open to this dialogue, but I find sometimes I get into an unforgiving space when I just mess it up from no lack of respect, just lack of practice. You know what I mean?
Well, I think the moral of this stretch of our conversation is that we're all living, growing, learning, expanding all the time if we're choosing to do so. And together, that's what makes the world a better place.
Agreed.
What would you like to? I would love for you to talk about some of the famous people that you've worked with. Like, I want to know what was it like to be on an all lesbian cruise with Wanda Sykes as one of the performers on that cruise, along with Wanda Sykes. What was that like?
You know, it's really interesting. You're not the first person who's asked me this, but people, when they're like, what was it like to work with Wanda Sykes? And the hilarious thing about it was I didn't meet her till the cast party. So I was opening for her, like on the same physical stage, but she would be in her green room. I would come out and open the show, warm up the crowd. Then I would exit the stage, and then there was like music and a transition, and then she would come on. So for the whole week of that, I actually wasn't on a cruise. It was hosted by Olivia Cruises, but it was a resort vacation. So, and then she would come on, and I already exited. So at the end of the week at the cast party, she was incredibly gracious, but I walked up to her and I'm like, "Hey Wanda, I'm Renee Santos. I performed with you this week. I opened for your, and I had to like introduce myself, even though like on the ticket, it looked like I had been opening for her all week. So it was sort of funny to be like, well, what was it like to work with her? And I'm like, she didn't even know I was there. That's the truth.
So was she the comic that came on right after you?
Yeah, one of the nights. So like the opening, I don't want to say the smaller comics, but those of us that weren't the headliners that were opening for the other larger artists, we were hosting smaller events because they wanted entertainment each night. So there was like the big main stage, and then there were also like smaller stages in the resort. We were also like hosting games, like pool games and all of this stuff too while you were there on the cruise. And so there'd be a night where she would be performing and I'd be performing in like the smaller theater that night. And so, but there was a big culminating show like the last night where we all spoofed other celebrities. I dressed as Britney Spears. I forget what Wanda Sykes dressed up as, in all honesty, but we all did the wobble together. Do you remember that dance? And that was really fun. It was at a white party. We're all in white doing the wobble, and she was awesome, like super sweet and gracious to me. I remember she was signing autographs and her Sharpie had run out, and I had like 6 different Sharpies that had a lot of ink. Because no one was asking me to sign my headshot. And so I kind of leaned over to her at the signing and I'm like, do you need an extra Sharpie? Because I got plenty. And she was like, well, I'm not going to sign yours unless you sign hers first. And it was like this sweet gesture to like get people to ask for my autograph first before, even those people were like, who's this girl?
Well, so, that was very kind of her. She
was a delight. She like, as a human being, she was super awesome to work with. But
the reason I was asking you if you would open for her on the same stage is because if I was going out as a comic, which I have done, I would want to know what the act was before me. I would want to have experienced it. I would want to know where the audience was in their in their mood before I walked out on that stage.
Well, I will say, just to give a little transparency about like being a working comedian, I have noticed that sometimes it's tougher to open for somebody who's more notable, and the reason being is the audience can sometimes be a little disrespectful because they don't know who you are. And so that's when they get up, they get their drinks, they're talking to their friends. They're like, who's this opener? We don't know who she is. So it's like, you don't have people's undivided attention. People are being disruptive. They're just waiting for the celebrity to get on the stage. So I've noticed that when I open or I'm on the same platform with somebody who's kind of in a similar place in their career, people are actually more engaged in the experience than when there's polarity between the opener and the actual celebrity. And I don't think that's the celebrity's fault. I think it's the nature of how fame exists in our audience's mind, Okay. And I also noticed that, and this is not specifically speaking to Wanda Sykes, that people are much more forgiving the more notable you are. Like when I get up there and they say, Renee Santos, who is she? I can't mess up. I can't have a joke that doesn't work. They expect me to be flawless because I have to prove myself. Whereas a celebrity, you can have a few jokes that don't work and no one cares because you're Wanda Sykes.
I've had some of the best experiences I've ever had as a performer doing comedy. And I had one of the worst moments of my life on stage was doing comedy, and this happened on the wrong night. Let me tell you, there's a whole story there. Now, you mentioned that this part of you dressed up as Britney. Do you do a Britney impression?
I did that week.
All right, what I want you to do an impression of someone that you
lip syncing.
it was lip syncing. No. I don't want to talk about that. Do you do impressions, and do you want to do one now?
I do a Cartman. I also have character work that's not necessarily impression, but I do this Russian lady. I call her Magda. She's not a real person, but she's like an older Russian lady that's jaded, that's been smoking for 47 years. She's like not a sexy Russian. She's my old lady Russian. So, I could talk like here now. My name's Magda. I'm an addict. You know what I mean? I don't want to sit here on this show and talk to you about what you think of me as comedian. You know, I don't want to. Like, I have a cigarette coming out of my mouth. That's my Magda.
Okay.
Does she sound like she's been a smoker for 47 years?
I would love to see you lip sync as Britney. I bet with the right wig you would be amazing. I have two questions that I know I want to ask before we conclude, and then an open-ended question, which means you get to add anything we've missed. But the first question I have is, what's next for you?
Ooh, that's a good one. Well, not to sound all like cryptic, but obviously this past year has been very bizarre with the coronavirus and quarantine. And my original plan, I had gone onto NBC in Palm Springs, actually their morning show, and announced my 2020 tour, and then it got completely canceled. And one of the things I learned about that experience is sometimes there's something to be said about not over planning, to have a vision for what your future is going to look like without staying too attached to the results. I learned that a lot in the last year. Because that was sort of a bummer. It's my album had just come out. My special had come out. I thought I was going to tour with the content, and then all of society shut down. So I would like to be able to actually tour at some point. It's I had that big moment, and then I never really got to share that content. So I've never toured with my album. So that's sort of on the radar, but I'm working on a few things. I have a really great management team, Embrace Your Cape. I love them, absolutely adore them. And we've been working hard.
They rep Margaret Cho among others?
Oh no, Margaret Cho is my record label, which two different things.
There's your record label. Okay, I got it.
They made Margaret Cho's first album, Uproar Entertainment.
Made
Margaret Cho's first album, and also Richard Pryor's very first album. So, but yeah, they produced my album. But I'm working on a podcast with fellow comedian Jackie Monahan, who also has an album called These Lips with Uproar Entertainment. And so we're putting that together right now.
Is she a lesbian because she has these lips and you have Outside the Box? I think that there's some synergy going on there.
Totally. And it's one of the reasons we're working together, because I think this is also important as artists, is that we're not in competition. We can collaborate. And
right.
She's another queer female comic that's, we're both sober. We talk a lot about this in our content. We have a lot of
I didn't know that about you. I have 20 years of sobriety.
You have how many years?
20.
Oh my God, you're amazing. 7.5 for me, but that's incredible.
High five.
High five to us. Wait.
And I have another show on the network called Higher Powered, which takes recovery out of the closet.
I love it. Well, that is so interesting that you're talking about this, because we're in the pre-production phases of my my podcast, but we're talking a lot about the 12 steps for normies and the access to how we all experience unmanageability and need to be restored to sanity, and we all have character defects, and how can we use this toolbox to sort of help people in general. And that none of us are normal. This whole concept of we're alcoholics and they're normies, none of us are kind of fit into that box. So
I'm putting up your website, and I have put this up throughout the show, that information, Twitter and Instagram. Your Facebook and YouTube URLs are just not too long. They're not too short enough to put up there, but people can find all your social media there. The other question I really wanted to ask you is at the top of the show, and I didn't ask you then because we were going to go in to some comedy clips. You mentioned you have a deep spiritual practice. What is it?
I'm sure that you can relate being in recovery, but yeah, it's taken me a long time to sort of cultivate my spiritual practice, but I personally believe that a relationship with a higher power is huge. It's a huge thing for me in my life. I don't want to be professorial about it all, because I don't believe that any human being on the planet should have a monopoly on God. Like, we all get to define how God shows up in our lives. But for me, it's a very important relationship, because I realize that, like, my very best thinking, made me an addict, and I wasn't pursuing my career. And it's like being able to get out of myself and allow something else to guide me has really helped me. And it's also taken all of that pressure off. And I realized, like, for a long time, I thought my powerlessness came like, I didn't like that. I'm like, what do you mean I have no power? And I realized our power as human beings is when we're not trying to control, manage, and manipulate the things that are out of our control. And that's how we get our power. And so my spiritual practice is very much about me connecting to that and making sure that I am host to God and not hostage to my ego, because I'm one of those two things, and it's given me a lot of humility. It's also allowed me to be gentle with myself in my creation of my art. I feel like I'm a messenger. Oftentimes, when I have the most amazing show of my life, I feel like a conduit. I don't get up there on stage and be like, wow, Renee's brilliant. I'm like, God, thank you. And every time, and I said it before I even came onto this show today, my prayer before I go on to any TV show, do stand-up, get on any set, I say, use me, God, so I may know the joy of being used by you. And it just centers me. It keeps me humble. It allows God to go before me. And that's part of my spiritual practice. I never enter any room unless I ask God to go before me.
Well, your appearance on my show today was divinely guided, especially given the conversation we've had and all of the similarities. And, in the rooms and elsewhere, I like to say, for people that don't believe, me plus you is a power greater than myself.
Yeah.
But my belief is also in something spiritual, and I honor and respect every part of any teaching that celebrates the universal equality of humanity, and I reject any part of any teaching that has to make other people wrong in order to be right.
Yeah, that's why I say that I don't think anybody has a monopoly on God. Like, we all get to define what it is for us. I mean, for me, it could be different but that's the other thing. When you know who you are and you honor your own practice, you're not threatened by somebody else's, And so, I'm all about people having their own practice. And even if you don't have a practice, for me personally, it's just a higher power it's law. It's like gravity. Like, gravity doesn't really care if you don't believe in it. Like, it's just a law, like whether or not you believe in gravity, if you jump off a building, you're gonna plummet to the ground. So it's like, for me, I just feel like what a great opportunity to plug into that. We all have access to plug into it. If you choose not to, I think life can sometimes be more difficult, but you can still live. It's kind of like, if you don't believe in gravity, you may fall off a few buildings and that's gonna suck, but like, you still, but I don't know. That's kind of how I see my spiritual practice, and it frees me. I don't like being in control all the time. And plus, when I am not attached to the result, like, amazing things happen, like, I can work my whole life picking apples from a tree, and then one day God will deliver a basket of oranges, and it's just as beautiful. And, like, to me, that comes from a connection with a power greater than myself, because sometimes my very best thinking can't even see what the universe is conspiring for me,
Just amen, sister. It's like, you're very much speaking to my heart today. Is there anything that you would like to add to this interview that we have not yet addressed?
I'd say to close out, I've had many dialogues with, like, artists, younger artists that sort of feel like pursuing this industry is an emergency. Like, you have to have it all figured out by 25. And so if I could impart any level of wisdom, it's that there isn't a timeline. There isn't a formula. Life doesn't stop at 25 years old. It's often the beginning. You can reinvent yourself at 35. You can change who you are at 60. You can change your career at 50. Like, I feel like there's ageism in this country doesn't just affect the old, it affects the young. That's why the young feel like everything's an emergency, you know? And so that's what I would say is enjoy every moment, smell every flower, take a picture of every hummingbird, like stay in it and just know that our job is to just be fully present in our experience and like everything will work out.
So you and I believe and have said the same things in so many different ways, and my philosophy is to, if I live my life, to live my life in the context of the greatest vision that I'm able to have for myself, without attachment to timeline and without attachment to specific outcome. And update this every day. And if something remains important, it will stay part of my vision. And if it isn't, it will slip away. And if I'm truly committed to it, I won't care how long it takes. And if I'm not attached to a specific outcome, I'm allowing a power greater than myself to surprise me along the way.
Yes, absolutely. When we strangle our will, there's no space for our higher power to give us something else, you know. I'll close out with this, but my sponsor once gave me an orchid when I was working on my third step. And for those of you who are not in recovery, it's where you like develop this relationship with a higher power. And she gave me this orchid and she had me hold on to it as tight as I could. And then she said, I'm going to give you a bunch of stuff, but do not let go of the orchid. And she kept like throwing stuff at me and it was just falling to the ground and falling to the ground. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, and she's like, that's what it's like to strangle your will, is that God keeps giving you stuff and you can't take any of it because you're holding on to your will, you know? And it made me realize like, and what I loved about it is the orchid was a flower. And I always thought, well, I'm so strong-willed. I'm strong-willed. I thought that was what was beautiful about me, was that I had a strong will. And I realized that was actually the part of me that I was missing. I was missing out on having a relationship with a power greater than myself because I thought I knew better.
Wow. I just have to say, wow. This has been a really a great joy to have you on the show.
Thank you, Nick. It's been such a delight to be here. You are a delight. Thank you for doing all that you're doing. Thank you for all of your transparency. You know, you are one of those predecessors that inspires all of us to like get out there and be authentic and show who we are, because ultimately, like, vulnerability is strength, and we inspire by having a willingness to be seen. And you have such a willingness to be seen, and I love that about you.
Well, thank you so much, even though you just called me old in your own way.
No,
I know, I'm kidding. I just had to end with a joke. Stay where you are. I want to speak with you backstage after I wrap up in just a minute. Thank you so much, Renee.
Of course. Thank you, guys.
ReneeSantos.com. You got to check her out. I'm so delighted she was on the show. I hope that you tuned in for this, and if you did, please tell your friends to watch. I think this is a really fun, inspiring episode from start to finish. I hope you agree, and I'll see you next time.
And I just can't get enough of your